Washington, D.C. had always been a cauldron of power plays and secrets, but the latest wave of rumors washing over Capitol Hill had even the most seasoned insiders on edge. Whispers of a corruption scheme running so deep it shook the very core of the Democratic leadership were now impossible to ignore. And at the center of it all stood Nancy Pelosi, the long-reigning titan from California. In the midst of it, one man sharpened his blade of facts and resolve. Senator Ted Cruz, the relentless Republican from Texas. Known for his articulate debates and unyielding pursuit of truth, Cruz had never been one to back down from a fight. But this was bigger than any skirmish on the Senate floor. For weeks, Cruz had been gathering evidence. It had started innocuously enough. A strange line item buried in a fiscal report, a questionable land deal in California, and a series of obscure shell companies tied to Pelosi's extended family. At first, it seemed circumstantial. But the deeper his team dug, the uglier it got. Late one evening, under the dull glow of the Capitol dome, Cruz sat with his chief of staff, Matt Dunning, in a private office tucked away from the main Senate building. She funneled how much? Cruz asked, incredulous. Close to $82 million if we include all the diverted funds from the so-called climate initiative passed last session. Matt replied, spreading out documents, bank records, and maps. Jesus, Cruz muttered, his brow furrowing. That's taxpayer money, and it's lining the pockets of her donors and her family. Worse still, some of the programs supposedly funded by this initiative had never even launched. Ghost grants, phantom projects, and behind every false document, a signature from someone in Pelosi's inner circle. What pushed Cruz to act wasn't just the money, it was the abuse of trust. American citizens were struggling with inflation, battling skyrocketing energy bills, and watching their small businesses collapse. And here was a member of the House allegedly redirecting public funds for personal and political gain. A late-night meeting with a whistleblower confirmed everything. The man, wearing a hoodie and sunglasses, slid into the seat across from Cruz in a dim corner of a diner in Arlington, Virginia. They call it Project Olive, the man whispered. It started off as a green energy fund, but only about 10% of it actually went to any real programs. And the rest? Cruz asked. To Pelosi's family foundations. To companies that don't exist except on paper. To offshore accounts in the Caymans. The man added. Cruz leaned back, his mind already racing. This was it. This wasn't just a scandal, it was an earthquake waiting to happen. He needed to act, and he needed to act fast. With the midterms looming and a growing wave of populist anger, the people were hungry for accountability. That weekend, Cruz flew to Texas for a town hall meeting. Standing before a packed auditorium in Houston, he didn't name names just yet, but he dropped a bombshell. I've uncovered deep corruption tied to top congressional leadership. Funds meant for American citizens have been siphoned off to enrich elites. And I'm not going to rest until every dollar is accounted for and every guilty party held responsible. The crowd erupted. The chant started small, then spread like wildfire. Drain the swamp. Drain the swamp. Cruz nodded solemnly. He wasn't doing this for political points. This was war, a war for the soul of American democracy. And next week, in a special congressional hearing, Cruz would get his chance. Pelosi had agreed to appear. Whether out of confidence or arrogance, no one knew. But what they did know was this. Ted Cruz was ready. And he wasn't pulling any punches. The House Oversight Committee hearing room was packed like never before. C-SPAN cameras rolled, Twitter buzzed like a hornet's nest, and every major network had their eyes glued to one moment, the impending face-off between Senator Ted Cruz and Representative Nancy Pelosi. Although it was unusual for a sitting senator to lead a questioning session in a House hearing, Cruz had been specially granted time due to the gravity of the evidence his office had uncovered. His voice had grown too loud to ignore, and both parties agreed to give him the floor, if only to silence the growing outrage. Pelosi walked in like royalty, flanked by aides and lawyers. Dressed in her signature bold colors and pearls, she wore a calm, calculated smile. But those who paid close attention could see her fingers tapping anxiously on the table. Cruz entered moments later, briefcase in hand, the room falling into a strange, tense silence as he approached the front. Cruz opened with surgical precision. Madam Speaker, he began, are you familiar with Project Olive, approved by the House in 2023 as part of the Green America Forward bill? Pelosi adjusted her glasses. Yes, Senator. That bill was intended to fund renewable energy initiatives across economically depressed regions. Cruz nodded, flipping through a file. And are you aware that less than 10% of the $800 million allocated for that initiative ever reached those communities? Her smile didn't falter. I'm not personally involved in the disbursement of those funds. That would fall to the appropriate federal agencies. Cruz leaned forward, voice calm but ice cold. And yet, oddly enough, 3 of those disbursement agencies, the ones that moved the largest chunks of money, transferred millions to a nonprofit based in San Francisco called the Green Horizon Collective. Pelosi nodded slowly. That's a nonprofit with ties to many environmental initiatives. It's perfectly legal. Cruz raised a photo and slapped it on the evidence table. That nonprofit's board chair is Alexander Pelosi III. Your nephew. The room gasped. Pelosi blinked just once. And according to these financial records, Cruz continued, Green Horizon Collective then paid $27 million in consulting fees to Horizon Solutions Incorporated, a for-profit company registered in Nevada. That company, Madam Speaker, is owned by your former staffer Cynthia Bell, and it shares an address with a Democratic fundraising PAC. Coincidence? I will not dignify this with Pelosi began, but Cruz cut in. I'm not done. He turned to the projector. A series of emails flashed on the screen, communications between Bell, Pelosi's staff, and lobbyists discussing moving money quietly and green bonuses. The media in the room exploded with rapid camera clicks. Even Pelosi's own allies shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Cruz raised his voice, still composed but with righteous fury. You helped create a paper trail of fraudulent nonprofits, funneled millions into shell companies, and used the guise of environmental policy to enrich your own allies and family. This is systemic corruption at the highest level. And I have all the proof. Pelosi responded with a glare. These are selective accusations, Senator. Mischaracterizations at best. Political theater. Cruz dropped the final bombshell. Then let's subpoena the full financials of your family's foundations. Let's subpoena Bell. Let's bring in IRS agents, whistleblowers, and forensic accountants. If you're innocent, you've got nothing to hide. Silence. For the first time in decades, Pelosi didn't answer. The hearing chair interrupted, clearly shaken. We will recess for now. Further sessions will be scheduled pending document reviews. But the damage was done. News outlets immediately ran with headlines like, Cruz corners Pelosi in brutal corruption hearing. $82M in missing funds tied to Pelosi's network. Democratic giant on the ropes? Twitter erupted. TikTok clips of the confrontation went viral within minutes. Conservative pundits hailed Cruz as a hero. Even left-leaning media couldn't deny. This was a disaster for Pelosi. The very next morning, America woke up to a political earthquake. Every major news outlet, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, even foreign press, had Cruz's interrogation of Pelosi on replay. The keywords Pelosi, Project Olive, and Cruz exposes corruption were trending worldwide. In Texas, Cruz's supporters were jubilant. In California, even some Democrats whispered uneasily about the implications. And in D.C., the knives were out, not just from Republicans, but from Pelosi's own party who feared her sinking ship could drag them under in the coming election cycle. Inside Pelosi's private office, the mood was dire. Her legal team scrambled through documents, desperately trying to counter Cruz's claims. Her longtime advisor, Mara Levine, looked her dead in the eyes. We need a strategy, Nancy. If the subpoenas go through, this could lead to criminal investigations. We've survived a lot. But this is different. Pelosi, though visibly shaken, maintained her composure. I've dealt with Cruz before. He's a grandstander. This will blow over. But it wasn't blowing over. Within 48 hours, Senator Josh Hawley, Representative Jim Jordan, and even moderate Democrats like Jared Golden publicly called for a bipartisan select committee to investigate Project Olive. Meanwhile, Cruz wasn't done. He appeared on Hannity, then 60 Minutes, then Meet the Press, laying out the facts with cool, calm precision. This isn't just about Pelosi, he said on national television. It's about an entire network of political elites treating taxpayer money as a personal piggy bank. And if it starts with her, so be it. The American people demand the truth. Back in the Senate, Cruz filed a formal criminal referral to the Department of Justice. Though not binding, it lit a firestorm of public pressure that Attorney General Cynthia Wright couldn't ignore. Within days, the DOJ confirmed that a preliminary review had been launched. The FBI quietly sent agents to Pelosi's former staffers. Her nephew Alexander received a summons. Cynthia Bell's home was searched, her emails seized. Meanwhile, Pelosi's team issued a press statement denying all wrongdoing. These baseless allegations are part of a right-wing smear campaign aimed at undermining climate initiatives and silencing progressive voices. It read, but cracks were forming. Late one night, Cruz received an encrypted email. A second whistleblower. This one had been part of the internal accounting team at Green Horizon Collective. They offered documents that went even deeper, showing manipulated financial reports, phantom grant recipients, and handwritten notes from a senior staffer reading. Ensure Nancy sees this before the next disbursement. Cruz read it twice. His jaw tightened. At that moment he knew this wasn't just political corruption. This was criminal fraud carefully orchestrated. He immediately arranged for the documents to be authenticated and transferred securely to DOJ and Senate investigators. He also called a press conference where he delivered the most damning quote of the entire saga. This is no longer about politics. It's about restoring trust in the very fabric of our republic. Nancy Pelosi must testify again under oath. And this time she won't walk away with spin and deflection. Behind closed doors, Pelosi was facing the worst pressure of her career. Party leaders whispered that she might need to step aside for the good of the party. Fundraisers were bailing. Allies were distancing themselves. The California governor's office privately expressed concern about the optics heading into the general election. Worse still, Cruz had become a national symbol of accountability even among independents. In a recent Gallup poll, 72% of Republicans supported a full investigation. 55% of independents agreed Cruz had presented compelling evidence. And shockingly, 29% of Democrats said they believed Pelosi needed to resign pending the outcome of the probe. The tide was shifting. What started as a rumor had exploded into a political inferno. And at the center of the firestorm was one unrelenting Texan senator armed with facts, fire, and the fury of the American people behind him. The storm around Pelosi reached hurricane levels within days. What once seemed like political posturing had now turned into a legitimate federal investigation, and Ted Cruz, love him or hate him, was leading the charge with relentless precision. In D.C., rumors spread like wildfire that a grand jury was being quietly assembled. The Department of Justice, pressed by the mountain of documentation and public pressure, had launched a full-scale inquiry into the disbursement of Green America Forward funds, focusing not just on Pelosi but on a web of other high-ranking officials tied to similar green initiatives. Cruz, meanwhile, stayed focused. This isn't about scoring points, he repeated on Face the Nation. It's about accountability. If we want to clean up Washington, we need to root out corruption even if it's politically inconvenient. But the biggest twist came when Cynthia Bell flipped. Faced with criminal charges, frozen assets, and an impending indictment, Pelosi's former staffer turned business associate agreed to cooperate with the investigation. Her testimony was a bombshell. In a closed-door meeting with federal investigators and later in leaked transcripts, Bell admitted that Pelosi had full knowledge of the shell companies, the siphoning of funds, and the consulting payments sent to family members. She described meetings in Pelosi's Georgetown home, emails that were never sent but printed and hand-delivered, and coded language used in internal memos to avoid detection. One quote from Bell's confession echoed across the media landscape. "We didn't think we were stealing. We thought we were reallocating." Nancy said it wasn't about money, it was about maintaining power. Even longtime Pelosi defenders struggled to respond. That very evening, Cruz stood outside the Capitol facing a forest of microphones. With the national flag waving behind him, he didn't gloat. He didn't boast. He simply said, "The truth has a way of catching up to even the most powerful. This isn't the end, it's the beginning of restoring honor to these halls." Inside the White House, things were shifting too. Though President Trump had remained largely silent throughout the initial phases, insiders confirmed he had been closely monitoring Cruz's investigation and privately commended the Texas senator's boldness. In a late-night tweet, Trump finally broke his silence. "Big kudos to Ted Cruz for his work in exposing Pelosi's corruption. The swamp is draining itself faster than I imagined. More to come. Stay tuned." United States #accountability matters. The tweet sparked another media frenzy, but it also made something very clear. Ted Cruz had become the face of anti-corruption in Washington. And then came the moment that truly shocked America. The House Oversight Committee issued a formal summons for Nancy Pelosi to return for a second round of testimony, this time under oath and under the threat of perjury. Pelosi's team fought back hard. Her lawyers filed motions citing health concerns, ongoing investigations, and political persecution. But public pressure mounted. Protests broke out in front of Pelosi's San Francisco office, some peaceful, some heated. Whistleblower testimonies, bank records, and Bell's confession had made it impossible to ignore. Polling now showed that 61% of Americans believed Pelosi should resign immediately. As for Cruz, he had already begun preparing the next phase. With his team, he compiled a comprehensive corruption report titled The Green Grift: How Political Elites Exploited America's Climate Agenda. It was 173 pages long, filled with timelines, money trails, names, and footnotes. He released it publicly, letting the American people read the facts for themselves. The report went viral. Independent journalists, watchdogs, and even foreign media praised the transparency. The tide had turned completely. From the halls of Congress to Main Street diners in Iowa, Cruz was being hailed as a whistleblower slayer, a principled warrior, a modern-day Paul Revere warning the people about a silent takeover of their trust and dollars. But he knew the job wasn't finished yet. Because while Pelosi was on the ropes, she hadn't been knocked out. And the next hearing, televised live, under oath, with America watching, was going to be the moment of truth. It was the hearing America had been waiting for. Millions tuned in as cameras flashed and news anchors breathlessly reported from outside the Capitol. Security was tight. Protesters and supporters clashed peacefully in the streets, holding signs that read, "Drain the swamp. Start with Pelosi. Due process for all. Truth matters. No one is above the law." Inside the hearing room, the atmosphere was electric. Senator Ted Cruz, seated at the head of the panel, leaned forward with a stack of documents in front of him, labeled, highlighted, and tabbed. Next to him sat Senators Marsha Blackburn, Josh Hawley, and Kyrsten Sinema, who, breaking party lines, agreed to participate in the investigation due to the overwhelming evidence. And seated across from them, flanked by her attorneys and advisors, was Nancy Pelosi. She looked different. The signature confidence had faded, replaced by a stoic tension. She was composed but cornered, prepared but exposed. Cruz opened the proceedings. "This hearing is not a trial, but the American people deserve truth. You are under oath, Congresswoman Pelosi. We ask that you answer truthfully, directly, and without political evasion." Pelosi nodded. "I understand, Senator." The first questions were about Project Olive, the initial contracts, the connections to Green Horizon Collective, and the funneling of funds to entities that had no actual staff or operational existence. She denied direct involvement, blaming administrative teams and faulty oversight. But Cruz wasn't there for easy answers. He presented signed emails, bank records, and a photograph showing Pelosi in a private meeting with Cynthia Bell and Alexander Warner, the two key players now under federal investigation. Cruz stared her down. "Congresswoman, you said under oath you had no knowledge of Green Horizon's misappropriated funds. But here's a photo timestamped 2022, showing you in a private strategy session at Bell's Napa residence, discussing Green America Forward. How do you explain this?" Pelosi shifted. "That meeting was purely social." Cruz pressed further. "Then why, according to these minutes provided by a second whistleblower, does it say Nancy to approve final round of grants for secondary shell partnerships? Alexander to draft formal document for sign-off? That doesn't sound like a cocktail party conversation." Gasps filled the chamber. Pelosi's lawyer whispered in her ear, urging her to invoke her Fifth Amendment rights. But she shook her head. She wasn't ready to concede, not yet. Then Cruz delivered the final blow. He pulled out a recorded phone call, legally obtained via whistleblower cooperation, where Pelosi's chief aide confirmed that Madam Speaker approved all financial redirections personally. "We didn't move a dime without her." Silence. Then murmurs. Then chaos. The committee chair called for order, but it was already too late. The public had heard it. Pelosi's aides had heard it. She was done. Sweat trickled down her temple. Her voice cracked slightly. I did what I believed was in the best interest of progress, of the climate, of the party. Cruz's response would become an instant classic, replayed in memes, speeches, and campaign ads for years. You may have believed in progress, Congresswoman, but what you did was profit off the trust of the American people. And no amount of spin will ever change that. Within a week, Nancy Pelosi formally announced her resignation from the House of Representatives, citing health reasons and a need to focus on personal matters. The DOJ filed federal charges of fraud, conspiracy, and misuse of government funds against multiple people tied to the Project Olive scandal, including former staffers, lobbyists, and nonprofit executives. Pelosi was not immediately indicted, but the investigation remained ongoing. The fallout was historic. Congress passed a sweeping bipartisan Anti-Corruption and Transparency Act, nicknamed the Cruz Code, which restructured how environmental grants were approved and enforced real-time public transparency of all federal funding recipients. And Ted Cruz? He became a national icon overnight. Even critics admitted he had single-handedly pulled off one of the most aggressive political accountability campaigns in U.S. history. A year later, in front of a massive crowd in Houston, he announced his run for President of the United States, stating, "We've cleaned up one corner of the swamp, but there's a whole country left to fix. And I'm ready."